It was a busy Saturday night, bars open, taxis on the rank, groups of friends spilling out into the crisp air. And yet, in the space of a handful of camera frames, a young man who'd driven to town and been photographed smiling with friends simply stopped being seen. How does someone disappear from a town centre that was, on paper, well covered by CCTV and then remain unfound for years? This is still unanswered. I'm Hannah Llewellyn. Welcome. This series looks at cases where key questions remain unresolved, where facts are known, theories are argued, but closure hasn't been reached. We try to be careful. We try to be fair. There's no music today, no dramatic stings, just voices and the pause between them. We're here to understand, not to sensationalise. Today's episode is about the disappearance of Corrie McKeague. In short, a serving RAF gunner out with friends in Bury St Edmunds, seen on CCTV in the early hours, then not seen again. Over time, police developed what has become known as the bin or landfill theory, conducting extensive searches at a landfill site. Families, the public and experts have debated every step. Today, we'll walk through who Corrie was, the timeline of that night, the CCTV evidence and its gaps, the bin theory and the searches that followed, the police investigation more broadly, the family's response, alternative theories, the role of digital evidence, and, crucially, what still remains unanswered. Joining me is Dr. Marcus Elwood. Marcus is a criminologist and former missing persons analyst who's advised UK forces on search strategy and complex no-body cases. Marcus, thanks for being here.
Thanks, Hannah. It's good to be here. I know this case sits heavily with a lot of people, and yeah, heavy is the right word.
Let's start, as we always do, by talking about Corrie beyond the headline. Marcus, help us put a person on the record here. Who was Corrie McKeague?
Corrie was, by all public accounts, in his early 20s, an RAF serviceman, described by family and friends as upbeat, sociable, with a sense of humour. He'd grown up in the area and was part of his base community. People who knew him spoke about everyday things, plans, girlfriends, friends, that sort of normal, ordinary life. We often talk about missing people as cases. In reality, these are people with routines, hopes and ties. Corrie was no different.
Right. And I want to be clear about that at the start, because it's easy, in retelling, to lose the human element. His family mounted public appeals from the earliest hours, asking for anyone who saw anything that night to come forward. They described him as warm, grounded, not someone likely to walk away from everything. They described him as warm, grounded, not someone likely to walk away from everything.
Yeah, and that family narrative matters in how investigations proceed. It shapes the kinds of questions police ask, and it shapes public expectations too.
OK, let's reconstruct the night itself. We'll take it step by step. Corrie spent the evening in Bury St Edmunds. He'd gone out with friends, visited pubs, and later left the immediate group, or so the timeline suggests. We have multiple confirmed CCTV points showing him at various moments that night. Then, crucially, he's captured entering an area of the town called the Horseshoe. After that, according to publicly described footage, he doesn't appear on camera again. Marcus, give us a clear sense of the timeline and what we can and can't state with certainty.
Sure. The publicly outlined timeline is fairly tight. Corrie was out in town, recorded on CCTV at different locations as the night progressed. He interacted with friends, had food, and later separated from some of the group. CCTV captured him walking toward the Horseshoe, which is an area of the town centre with shops, alleyways, and a small complex of streets. The last confirmed images are of him in or entering that area in the early hours. After that, the trail goes cold in terms of clear, confirmed sighting on the town's cameras. What we can state as fact is that he was photographed at set times and places that night. What we cannot say with certainty, at least based on what has been publicly disclosed, is how he left the horseshoe or where he went immediately after those last images.
And drinking is part of the story, understandably. Witnesses and friends described Corrie as drunk enough to be off his usual pace, but not, to their knowledge, incapacitated. The specifics of intoxication are always tricky. People perceive levels differently. But police noted that alcohol likely influenced his ability to navigate the town that night. It's an important factor, not as an explanation, but as context.
Exactly. Alcohol can affect memory, balance, decision-making. That complicates witness accounts and potential actions. But crucially, intoxication alone doesn't explain disappearance when the town is surveilled.
So let's pause there and focus on that surveillance, the horseshoe itself. If you haven't been to Bury St Edmunds, picture a compact town centre. Narrow streets, businesses open late, a venue area, the horseshoe. For listeners, imagine a little maze of streets, doorways and businesses. It's not a wide open space. It has alleys, loading bays, bins, and access points that are not all in direct line with a camera. Marcus, can you walk us through what the CCTV coverage looked like based on what's publicly known?
From descriptions available, the horseshoe had several cameras that covered main thoroughfares and shop fronts. But, and this is important, no urban CCTV network is perfectly comprehensive. Blind spots exist. Alleyways, service entrances, the backs of buildings, areas obscured by signage or delivery vehicles. In Corrie's case, the public accounts describe him being seen by cameras approaching and entering the horseshoe area, and then there are gaps. Some cameras show him, some don't. A few angles are grainy or restricted for reasons of ongoing investigation. That combination, partial coverage, blind spots, and variable image quality, opens possibilities for how someone might move through the area without a continuous visible trail.
Which sounds simple, but feels, to many people, almost impossible. You've got cameras, you assume you're seen, but as Marcus points out, seen is a technical term. A person might be in frame generically, or they might be obscured, or the camera angle might miss an exit. All of that matters. And some footage has been released publicly, some has not. So, listeners, here's one methodological point. I will always distinguish what is in the public record from what police have seen in private. The public narrative is necessarily partial.
And to add, police are cautious about releasing footage because of investigative integrity and later court proceedings. So public gaps don't necessarily equal actual camera failure, but they do create uncertainty for the public and family.
Let's move to what came to be called the bin theory. This is the critical turn in the investigation that, for many, has been both logical and difficult to accept. In essence, investigators developed a scenario where Corrie could have become trapped in a commercial bin in the horseshoe area and been removed by waste collectors that morning. The bin then taken to a landfill where remains would be very hard to recover. Marcus, describe how police arrived at that hypothesis without getting sensational.
Police were mapping all possible exits from the horseshoe and reviewing local operations that could move material off-site. One element they examined was the town's waste collection schedule. Bins are collected overnight by private contractors, compacted and transported to transfer stations or landfills. Investigators looked at which bins were emptied in the early hours and at weight readings recorded by collection crews. Certain weight anomalies and the timing of collections focused attention on a particular bin route and therefore a link between the horseshoe and a landfill. That created a plausible, not definitive, pathway by which a person could be taken from the town to landfill without being seen by main CCTV cameras.
Key word, plausible. I want to underline that. The police publicly said it was a working hypothesis, the likeliest explanation based on data they had, but they also acknowledged it remained unproven, and they never found Corrie. The bin theory is, understandably, a source of anguish for Corrie's family. They have accepted some parts of the investigation and publicly disputed others, questioning whether certain assumptions were tested rigorously enough.
And the family's skepticism is not unusual. When a case turns on a single circumstantial line of evidence, in this case bin weights and collection routes, families will scrutinize each step. From an investigative perspective, it's a controversial pivot because it leads to an enormous operational commitment. Searching a landfill is extremely complex, costly, and frankly, emotionally brutal for families and officers alike.
Let's talk about that search, because it was huge. The police carried out landfill searches over many months. They involved forensic teams, machinery, and thousands of hours. Marcus, tell us the practicalities. How do you even begin to search a landfill? What are the techniques and the limitations?
Searching a landfill is one of the most challenging tasks an investigator can face. Landfills are made up of layers upon layers of compacted waste, often mixed with construction debris, organic material, and contaminants. Investigators use a mix of mechanical excavation, diggers and sift screens, and manual searching by trained teams. They also employ cadaver dogs and forensic specialists who can detect microscopic traces. But there are limits. Once material is compacted or moved, small items or biological material can be degraded, obscured, or rendered unrecoverable. Weather, time, and the sheer volume of material compound the difficulty. So it's not surprising, although it is heartbreaking, that large searches sometimes fail to recover definitive human remains.
In Corrie's case, the searches reportedly covered a wide area at a landfill site linked to the waste route in question. They ran for months, drew national attention, and exhausted significant resources. Yet, publicly, police announced no conclusive human remains linked to Corrie were found. That absence of discovery after such a large operation is one of the central lingering questions.
And it's worth noting that no result can mean several things. It might mean the theory is incorrect. It might mean the remains were degraded beyond recognition. It could mean the assessment of the precise route or times was slightly off, so searchers were looking in the wrong pile at the wrong time. The uncertainty is what makes these cases persist in the public consciousness.
Which brings us to how the broader police investigation unfolded beyond the landfill work. Early on, Corrie was reported missing. Officers interviewed friends, bar staff, taxi drivers, gathered statements. They examined phone records, CCTV outside the town, and vehicles in the area. Over time, statements were reassessed, new data was considered, and the investigation shifted as leads were followed. Marcus, from your experience, how do police prioritise lines of inquiry in a case like this where there are so many unknowns?
Prioritization is about likelihood and feasibility. Initially, investigators try to establish a time frame and a geographic radius, pulling every camera, every witness, every digital trace into a map. Where evidence suggests a concrete movement, like a bin collection route, resources may be redirected to test that hypothesis because it offers a testable scenario. But investigators must also keep other avenues open: potential abduction, voluntary disappearance, or accidental injury elsewhere. It's a balance between focused searches that can be intensive and broad investigative sweeps that keep possibilities alive.
And that balance is precisely where families sometimes feel the pain. They want everything done, every theory tested, every passerby questioned, but practicalities, funding, officer hours, diminishing leads influence choices. Corrie's family repeatedly campaigned publicly for more action and for certain lines of inquiry to be re-examined. They also criticised the way some data, like bin weight readings, were handled. There's real grief beneath those critiques.
Absolutely. We must remember that investigations are undertaken by humans with finite resources, but that doesn't alleviate the human cost to families who live in limbo. That perspective should shape how police communicate and how the public listens.
Let's pause to let listeners hear, in their minds, the family's voice. Publicly, they've made appeals, they've walked the streets, they've fought for searches, and they've also expressed doubt about whether the landfill hypothesis alone explains what happened. They have said at times they feel the theory hasn't accounted for every possibility, and they highlight small discrepancies they feel were overlooked. Those are powerful, personal observations, not evidence in themselves, but vital to understanding the human story here.
And those familial observations are often the most persistent drivers of further inquiry. Families re-examine timelines, they reach out to witnesses, they sometimes prompt reanalyses of previously collected data. Their lived knowledge can unearth small details that change the way investigators think about a case. Their lived knowledge can unearth small details that change the way investigators think about a case.
Okay, let's catalogue some of the alternative theories that have been discussed publicly, without endorsing any. First, that Corrie left the horseshoe via an unmonitored route, an alley or service access, and then either walked out of the town, was picked up by a vehicle, or left independently. Second, that a vehicle was involved in moving him from the area, which would rely on suspect vehicles being in the right place at the right time. Third, that the bin weight data, or its interpretation, was wrong, and following that line led investigations away from other useful leads. Marcus, walk us through how plausible those alternatives are, in your view, given what is known.
Each alternative has degrees of plausibility. Leaving via an unmonitored route is technically possible. Towns have gaps in coverage. That would rely on either an exit on foot or unauthorized access to a vehicle. The vehicle theory hinges on whether any vehicles were placed on record in the area at the relevant time and whether they were traced. For that to be compelling, you'd want cross-checked sightings or independent CCTV. As to the data question, if the bin weight readings were misinterpreted, say sensor errors or recording anomalies, that could indeed have steered investigators down a false lead. Data integrity is crucial. Small errors can cascade into large operational choices. But remember, plausibility isn't proof. Each of those theories requires corroboration.
And in public hearings and reviews, those points have been pressed. Some commentators asked whether police became too focused on a single hypothesis. The police response, based on their public statements, has been to say they tested multiple lines but pursued the landfill because it matched available evidence. That, again, is where tensions sit. We tested this versus we want more testing. Marcus, can you talk about the role of re-evaluation in cold or stalled investigations?
Re-evaluation is essential and often happens years into a case. New technologies in forensics, digital analysis, data modeling can change what evidence tells you. Also, witnesses who were silent for years may come forward. So investigators should periodically audit their assumptions, re-examine earlier decisions, and consider whether a singular view became dominant without sufficient challenge. Ideally, internal review teams and external oversight do this. Practically, that depends on resourcing and the will to reopen or reframe lines of enquiry.
That connects to the digital trail: phones, cell site data, timestamps. Corrie's phone activity has been part of the public record in broad terms. For many modern investigations, phones are the breadcrumb trail that can confirm a timeline or show anomalies. In Corrie's case, there were readings that placed the phone in certain areas around the time he was last seen. But phone data is imperfect. Marcus, explain generally how cell tower data is used and misused in missing person cases.
Cell site analysis is a powerful tool, but it's probabilistic, not pinpoint. A phone connects to the nearest or strongest mast, but signal can jump due to buildings, atmospheric conditions, or network load. So cell tower X doesn't always mean being physically next to that mast. Analysts use it to create a likely corridor of movement rather than precise coordinates. Also, phones can be turned off, left behind, or used by others. In Corrie's situation, cell data provided corroboration for some movements but left gaps that could be interpreted in multiple ways. Over-reliance on cell data without corroborating footage or witness testimony can mislead.
And there were gaps. The phone's last activities have been publicly discussed but not fully explained to the public, and that uncertainty feeds other theories. Marcus, another common public question: could new technology, say improved DNA extraction, better image enhancement, AI-based pattern recognition, change this case now?
Possibly. Forensics evolves. Techniques like enhanced DNA recovery from degraded samples, improvements in digital footage enhancement, and better data analytics can sometimes reveal things previously missed. That said, if the physical evidence simply isn't there, technology can't conjure it. But reprocessing old material with new methods has solved cold cases before, so it's always worth periodic review.
Let's talk about media and public reaction, which is another part of the story. Corrie's case attracted intensive coverage, then prolonged public discussion as the landfill searches unfolded. Social media produced theories, some well-informed, some speculative. There have been moments of sympathy and moments of harsh commentary toward those who raised questions. Marcus, what effects do public theories and misinformation have on an investigation and on families?
They can be double-edged. Helpful witnesses sometimes come forward because of public appeals, and public scrutiny can keep pressure on authorities to act. But misinformation can muddy the waters. False sightings, misidentified footage, or conspiracy theories can divert attention and resources. For families, the emotional toll is significant. The internet amplifies grief, speculation, and sometimes targeted abuse. Responsible journalism and measured public engagement are crucial in ongoing cases.
And, to be frank, part of why we do this podcast the way we do, slow, careful, context-driven, is a response to that. We owe it to families to avoid sensationalism that can be harmful. Marcus, returning to the investigation itself, what do you see as the central unanswered questions that, if answered, would move this case decisively forward?
There are a few. First, the exact route out of the horseshoe, if such a route exists, and why it wasn't captured. Second, the integrity of the bin data, whether sensors or logs were accurate and whether they were interpreted correctly. Third, any overlooked witnesses or vehicle movements in the narrow time frame that night. Fourth, whether any forensic trace, however small, can still be located or reanalyzed with modern methods. Each of those questions, addressed with fresh attention, could change the picture.
And to add, the question that people live with every day: was there an avoidable investigative blind spot? That is an uncomfortable question for police and painful for families, but it's necessary. Investigations are human endeavours. They err, they persist, they sometimes close some doors and leave others ajar. Which leads us to the official status and the practical what now? What would change the case at this stage?
Official status can vary over time, but typically in such high-profile missing person cases, the investigation remains open pending new, credible information. What would change things? New witnesses with verifiable information, a reanalysis of material using updated forensics, or the recovery of physical evidence linked to Corrie. Also, procedural reviews that highlight missed opportunities can prompt re-examination. In essence, new evidence, not reinvigorated discussion alone, is what moves an investigation forward.
For anyone listening who genuinely believes they have information, the right path is to contact the local police force or an anonymous tip line using the official channels. Please don't take matters into your own hands, and don't amplify unverified claims on social media. That can derail investigations and cause further harm.
Yes, and if people are unsure whether what they know is relevant, ask. A small detail that seems trivial to you may be pivotal to investigators.
Before we close, Marcus, I want to ask you something a bit harder. From a professional vantage point, what do you think needs to shift, culturally or procedurally, in how we handle these kinds of missing person investigations to better serve families and the public?
A few things. 1. Transparency balanced with investigative integrity. Families and the public need clear, honest updates about what is known, what is being tested, and why certain operational decisions are made. 2. Periodic independent review of case strategy to catch groupthink or tunnel vision. 3. Better long-term resourcing for searches and forensic reanalysis so cases don't hinge on short-term funding cycles. And 4. Stronger support and communication with families, not only as sources of information, but as partners experiencing the consequences of investigative choices.
That's a helpful framework. Now, as we finish, I want to pull together the strands, the things that remain unanswered in the clearest terms. How did Corrie leave the horseshoe without a continuous CCTV trail? Is the bin landfill theory accurate? And if so, why were no traces found despite major searches? Were there investigative blind spots that need revisiting? And finally, what does closure look like when the likeliest explanation still leaves such enormous doubt?
Those are the core questions, and sadly, at this stage, answers remain elusive. That's why the case still sits with people, because plausible explanations are not the same as proof, and because no single piece of evidence has given the family the certainty they need.
I want to end with a few quiet, personal reflections. This is not just about methods and hypotheses. It's about a family who woke up one morning without a son, a community that watched a search unfold, and colleagues in the RAF who lost someone they trained with and laughed with. When we talk about the case, we must never lose sight of Corrie as a person. To Corrie's family, the perseverance and the calls for answers are part of what keeps cases alive. That is both a burden and a force for good.
And to listeners, when engaging with these stories, remember the human cost. Facts matter, yes, but the way we discuss them matters too. Be curious, be critical, and be compassionate.
If you have information that could help, contact the local police using their public numbers or the appropriate anonymous reporting service. Don't post unverified claims online. That can hurt people and complicate inquiries. This has been Still Unanswered. I'm Hannah Llewellyn, and with me was Dr. Marcus Elwood. Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Hannah. Take care.
And thank you to you listening. We'll keep watching these cases with care, clarity, and, where possible, compassion. Good night. Still Unanswered.